All right. Maddie, we are recording, so you can start the slides anytime. And Claire, could you turn off your video, please? Good stuff, thanks. Maddie, we can go one round. We'll get started broadcasting here. Good luck, everyone. Thank you so much.
Hello, everyone, and welcome from the Lantern and the Michigan Daily. Thank you so much for joining us for The Rivalry, Michigan and Ohio State in Conversation. Today, we bring together alumni, leading sports broadcasters, and student editors to discuss this legendary sports rivalry and the third annual joint publication of the print and digital Rivalry Edition. Whether you're a Wolverine or a Buckeye, please consider donating to support award-winning student journalism through our fundraising competition at therivalrygame.com. Throughout the webinar, we encourage you to submit questions by clicking Q&A at the bottom of your screen. Note that all attendees are muted and your video is off. Now, over to our moderator, Ohio State alum Albert Breer, senior reporter and lead content strategist at Sports Illustrated.
Well, welcome into everybody. We're excited to have everybody who's on here. And I'm excited to take part of this because this is a rivalry sort of told the story of my family in a lot of different ways. I did go to Ohio State. I graduated in 2002. Like a lot of you who are on this, I wrote for the Lantern. And it's a huge part of my career coming up. But I was also I'm also the son of a Michigan alum. I'm the grandson of a Michigan alum. I have lots of cousins that went to the University of Michigan. So I'm a little bit of a black sheep in my family, but I'm a black sheep with a lot of bragging rights right now. And yeah, so what the rivalry's meant to me, it's just since I was very little, I can remember, how these games played out. I can remember the Tim Biaka-Batuka game when I was in high school. I can remember in 1998, Ohio State beating Michigan my freshman year. I can remember in 2001 in Jim Tressel's first year there, which is my senior year at Ohio State, going with a bunch of my fraternity brothers up to Ann Arbor and watching Ohio State beat Michigan in the game that really sort of turned the rivalry. So a lot of ways, I can kind of, trace this over the course of my life. This is what I remember from every November when I was really young, rooting for Michigan. And then starting when I was 18 in 1998, rooting for Ohio State. And I'm excited to get this started. We got a couple of great panelists to kick things off with, guys who played in this rivalry. We've got 1972 Michigan graduate Jim Brandstatter. He's an offensive lineman for the Wolverines, now the play-by-play man on the Michigan Radio Network. And we got Josh Perry, a 2015 graduate of The Ohio State University, a linebacker on Ohio State's national championship team. And I'm excited to get started with you guys because you guys have seen this rivalry from the ground floor. You guys know what it looks like. I think both you guys grew up following it. And Jim, it's really interesting kind of looking at your history because you've seen this from a lot of different angles. and I think, and I don't want to offend anybody on here, but I think you probably, played in what I think was considered the golden age of the rivalry, which is the 10-year war, when Woody Hayes was the coach at Ohio State and Bo Schembechler was the coach at Michigan. So I thought the right way to kick this off would be to just start with your memories of this rivalry, what it meant to you when you were playing in it, what it was like back then in the 70s, and how things have changed over the years.
Well, clearly it was the biggest rivalry that Michigan has had, and part of it began with Woody and Bo. When Coach Hayes in 1968, remember this, won a national title in Ohio Stadium with Ron Johnson, the great Ron Johnson of Michigan, as a running back. Woody was ahead 50-14 and went for 2 points at the end of the game. And they asked him, it's a legend, I know, and I'm not sure that anybody can confirm this actually was said, but they asked him, why did he go for 2 when he was up that big late in the game? And he said, well, the reason I went for 2 is because I couldn't go for 3. And that began the rivalry. And in 1968, when he said that, and he beat Michigan 50-14, in 1969, he came to Ann Arbor with what was considered the greatest college football team ever assembled, with Rex Kern at quarterback, Jim Stillwagon at middle guard, and Jim Otis. I mean, they had great, great players. There was Sports Illustrated articles that said Ohio State's only real competition is when they play practice and they play number 2, their second team. And the fact that they could go in the NFL and beat an NFL team, that's how good they were. Well, they came to Ann Arbor in 1969 in Bo Schembechler's first year, and Michigan beat them 24-12. And that game, I think, began what would be called the modern rivalry of Michigan-Ohio State. Before that, it was a rivalry. After that, it became blood war. And with Bo and Woody being proteges, Bo coached for Coach Hayes. They had great respect for each other. But boy, there was no one more they wanted to beat than each other. And that started what we are now talking about on this webinar, Michigan-Ohio State. And it's been going since that time. And it meant everything to us to beat Ohio State back in the 1970s, as I'm sure it does today to the Ohio State players in the 2021 years.
All right, Joshua, you played for a guy who grew up on the rivalry too, in Urban Meyer. And I think, I don't know what the best word to describe like the way he felt about Michigan was, or how how strong that, it felt like it was sort of an obsession for him, right? Like the idea of beating Michigan, and he goes 7-0 against Michigan. So, 40 some odd years later, after Jim played in that rivalry, like what did it mean to you, and what did it mean to your coaches? What did Urban Meyer bring to that rivalry? The same way, like Jim was just talking about what Bo and Woody brought to it. Like, what was the feel for you when you were in it?
It's really unique because you can look at that point in the rivalry when I was playing from 2012 to 2015. Ohio State had a lot of success against Michigan. And so people always ask, well, was it still truly a rivalry? How did you all feel about it? And you pointed to Urban's obsession about the game, and that's exactly what it was. It was a true rivalry. And he was a huge part of that, having a background, being an Ohio guy and having been on staff in the past. But also when you look at the rivalry in my era, you have to juxtapose it with the fact that these aren't rosters that are mostly made up of Ohio and Michigan guys. These are national rosters. And so there's a brainwashing process that goes into it for young Ohio State players. And Urban was able to convey the message of how important the game was. And you can look back at some of them, and Ohio State had the clear talent advantage. But in the competitions that we played, a lot of them were really close, because that is a game that is played off of emotion. There are guys who are committed to the fact that that's the only game that matters on the schedule. And that's how we felt about it, even with the amount of success that we had. And it's always so interesting because I've been able to spend time around guys who went to the University of Michigan and played there. And I talked to them about it because I had 4 wins in my 4 years at Ohio State. And you can hear the pain in their voice as they relive some of the memories from the rivalry, because it is still that important to everybody. So it's very unique. Obviously, the tide has turned a little bit, but this is one of those cyclical things where you can look through the history books and say that there's probably going to come another turning point where Michigan will take hold of the rivalry again. And that's why this thing is so intriguing.
To piggyback real quick on Josh's point, Josh will tell you this. when people ask you if you're a player from Michigan and you're a player from Ohio State, you know what their question is? Not what your record was what your record was against Ohio State.
Yeah.
It's not about, oh, we were 9-1. Well, what did you do against Ohio State?
That's right.
We were 10-1. Well, did we lose or win to Ohio State? And it's the same way. And that's how you really judge your career. What was your record against that rival? I think that's the way it is, isn't it, Josh?
That's absolutely what it is. And you're right. It's funny because you get into NFL locker rooms and these are accomplished, decorated guys who have done everything. And then you get into boardrooms again, where you have former players who are very decorated and accomplished. And a lot of them will tell you like their emotions and their feelings and thoughts about their college careers oftentimes will ride off of the success that they had in that game. It was that important.
Josh, Josh brought up an interesting word though, brainwashing. And a lot of the guys, a lot of the big name players in this game, Jim and Josh, are not Ohioans, aren't Michiganders, right? On the Ohio State side, I think Garrett Wilson's from Texas, right? Jackson Smith and Jigba's from Texas. CJ Stroud is from California. Chris Olave is from Florida. Cade McNamara, I believe, Jim, is from Nevada, right?
Right. Yep.
Yeah. So, what was the I'm just sort of interested. What was the brainwashing process, Josh?
I think Josh talked about Urban Meyer and how he brainwashed. I mean, at Michigan, when you come, Ohio State is just the game. Once you commit to the University of Michigan, you better get on board and understand that, first of all, and I know Josh feels the same way, every team that you play, you are their rival.
Yep.
From day one, from game 1 to game 11, if you're wearing a Michigan jersey or if you're wearing an Ohio State jersey, you're that guy's rival. And it just gets to the point where for Michigan and Ohio State, that's a fact of life. But that game at the end of the season, late November, that's the one that you realize is the one. That's why they call it the game. And brainwashing, yeah, guys from different parts of the country come in, but I think around the program, whether it's your student body, whether it's the kids that you know in class, whether it's the coaches, I don't know how, but that whole environment kind of leads you to a determination that, hey, this game is different. It's not just another game with a team from the Big Ten East. This is Ohio State, and I think that's how it gets. Just a real quick point to go on Josh's point. Go to the NFL, and I'll never forget Jumbo Elliott, great offensive tackle for University of Michigan. Went to the New York Giants. Bill Parcells, his coach, okay? Parcells takes him during a pregame warm-up, and he looks at Jumbo, and he goes, Jumbo, see those guys down there? And they're playing the Buffalo Bills or somebody, right? He goes, they're not wearing Ohio State uniforms, but God damn it, you better play like they are. That's how you motivate a kid from Michigan or Ohio State.
Yeah, I'll jump in on this idea of having to brainwash kids into understanding the rivalry. So Urban would, during practice and spring practice and all throughout training camp and throughout the season, would have a period of practice called the Team Up North period, where all you did was work on things that Michigan did that could hurt you in a game. And this was, again, back in spring where you're not imminently playing a game throughout training camp. It's the last game of the regular season. And we would work Michigan every single day. At the end of workouts, we would have a finisher. We would call it the Team Up North finisher, where the coaches are just trying to get you gassed at the end of the workout. And the feeling that you feel of being tired and hating your coach because he's yelling in your face is what they want you to feel on the field when you go and play against Michigan in the game. And then the week of the game, it was phenomenal. Just the level of intensity and how it ramped up. There's this LL Cool J song called It's Time for War. And that song was played 24/7 on a loop. And they had a greatest hits compilation, highlight reel type of video that they would play on a loop as well. And it was just some of the greatest plays from the rivalry. And it was to build that mentality. We would put the Michigan scout team jerseys on the floor for players to walk over as they came into the facility. It had to feel different than anything else that you were preparing for.
There's a respect factor too, though, isn't there? I mean, one thing I always remember, and you read about it and you hear about it, and there's the whole Bo and Woody were actually very close friends. And at the end, like, when Woody passed, like there was no one who was more heartbroken than Bo, right? And I'd assume to some degree, like that exists too with guys who played, right? Like, so like, Jim, why don't we start with you here? What's your interaction like? When you run into a guy who played at Ohio State from your era, because I'm sure when you're playing against them, you freaking hate them, right? Like, and you
well, I don't know whether you hate them. It's like Josh says, you work up an intensity where you want to win, you want to beat them, you want to knock them down, and you want to walk all over them. But after it's over. But the thing I think you mentioned, respect. When you get into this business of playing Division I football, going to a program like Michigan or like Ohio State, you have challenged yourself already when you made that decision. I want to play the best. I want to see how good I am against the best. And when you play Ohio State, you're playing the best. You're measuring yourself up against it. So that they're the same way. And yeah, there's a healthy dislike. But the fact is there's that respect to know you can't take it down off. You cannot lose your intensity, because if you do, they'll walk all over you, and they want to. And that's what I think motivates you to be as good as you possibly can be, because you've already made that decision when you decided to go to that school. And I think there's that respect factor. And at the end of the day, when you've beaten them and you walk off the field and you're holding the trophy, you're saying, I've accomplished something really, really special by doing this. And it's a collective. It's a group. It's not just me. It's all 105 of you on that team that experiences that joy and that sense of accomplishment when you beat a team that you consider really, really good.
And there's this idea that respect is earned, and I totally agree with that. And you can look through the history books on this rivalry, and there are numerous instances where the team that was favored on paper lost, right? And so that's where the respect comes from, is the fact that you understand that there are good players on the other side, and you understand that you can throw the records out because you're going to get the best shot every single time. I can remember back to the game that we played in 2013, and it was not a great Michigan team, and it was an Ohio State team that I was on that was, top 3 in the nation, or whatever the case was. And that was a game that was 42-41. It came down to a last play, and my buddy Tyvis Powell had to get an interception in order to seal the deal when Michigan went for 2. Those are the types of outcomes that you get, because regardless of what the previous games came out to, the players will always rise to the occasion in the game.
Okay, we're going to start to transition and bring our student journalists in here, but just to wrap it up with you two guys, and you guys are going to stay, of course, for that part of the discussion too. But I just want to ask you guys, like, how like playing where you played helped you become, media people, how it helped you move into the field of sports journalism. I can say for me personally, like having worked at the Lantern, when I first walked into an NFL locker room, and I've covered the NFL for 17 years now, like a lot of people in my position walk in and they're wide-eyed and they're shocked and they're like, I can't, like, how do I handle this? Like for me, like I felt like I covered an NFL team when I was in college, and there was like a real like time on task that I felt like I had spent, I had served by being around that when I was in college. And I think all of you guys who are at the Michigan Daily, at the Lantern, at Ohio State are getting that now, that you get to be around that. But for you guys, your paths are obviously a little bit different. Josh with Big Ten Network, Jim doing the play-by-play. How is this, how was your experience as a player? How did it kind of help lead you into doing what you're doing now?
You want to go, Josh?
Yeah, I'll take this. So for me, it's unique as you look at it. In the day and age that we're in, sports is a 24/7 media content generator. And when you're at a program like Ohio State or at Michigan, you are oftentimes under the magnifying glass of that media cycle. And so as a player, we had all of the media outlets, from the Lantern, from some of the fan websites, all the way up to the national media with Fox Sports and with ESPN, who would come and cover us as players. And I just got really comfortable in front of a microphone answering questions. My face was seen. by a number of people. And I think that was one of the biggest things that helped me transition into media. This was an opportunity that found me more than I found it. But just the fact that we have the power of these brands behind us, I think is big in the fact that we could step into the media space. And for the students that are on here, I would say that's one thing you can leverage. And I know we're going to get into this a little bit later, but Michigan, one of the great institutions in the world, Ohio State, one of the great institutions, both big brands, both have a ton of alumni. Leverage that because it's important and people want to help you out. And it's going to get your foot in the door just the same way it did with me and the Big Ten Network.
Yeah, like Josh, back when I played, one of the most important things we did when we were kids, and I'm 19 years old, the NFL and professional football wasn't a factor. What was more important to us was we needed to get a degree because that was going to be the job. Back in 1971, when I graduated, if you went to the NFL, you know what you made if you were not a big star. You weren't O.J. Simpson or you weren't one of the great names back then. You were just a guy that went to play in the NFL. Your yearly salary was $12,000. You had to get a job in the off season. You couldn't make it for a full year. So times have changed. And so when I graduated, I had graduated with a degree in general studies from the University of Michigan. And it allowed me to have an opportunity to get a job with a small little television station in Saginaw, Michigan. I was the sports director, but I also covered news. I covered the Bay City council meetings. I did all that little stuff where I got my training. Josh has a great opportunity because of today's media. It's in YouTube. It's on online. It's websites. His training is coming while he's in school. My training didn't come till after I graduated. I didn't have all that. But I found my way into what I really wanted to do. And what I wanted to do was play-by-play. Anybody can sit on a desk and do the news at 6 and 11 and read the highlights. But being at the game, being at the event, preparing like you would for a game as a player so that you get to ad lib, use all that knowledge you've got and make the trip for the listener or the viewer a good trip and help him and add to his experience game day. To me, that was where I wanted to go. Luckily, I was able to work my way into it. And for 31 years, I did Michigan and the Lions. And this is my last year. The 43rd, I will have done University of Michigan football on radio or television.
All right. So we're going to bring in our student journalist now. And I think we're going to start a conversation that's going to be something everybody can relate with. And I want to welcome in the editors-in-chief of the Lantern and the Michigan Daily for this one. And you guys can handle this however you want. Whichever one of you guys want to jump in first, go ahead. And introduce yourselves too, as we go to you. I think we've all dealt with this on one level or another, where the pandemic has affected the way that we've lived our lives, like in the way that we've been able to operate over the last year and a half. And you guys are uniquely positioned because there was no roadmap for you. And there weren't older people, when you're in that position, you're 19, 20, 21, 22 years old. Like normally you'd have people that you could go to and say, well, what was this like? Or how do I do this? You guys didn't really have that. So I wanted to first you guys introduce yourselves, but I also wanted to kind of get you guys' take on covering news in the pandemic and some of the challenges that you guys faced as student journalists.
Yeah, thanks, Albert. I will go first. My name is Bella Chikowski. I'm the editor-in-chief of The Lantern. And I'll start off by saying that it was a challenge. I came to journalism, and all of my journalism education, with the exception of maybe 2 months, has been through the pandemic. So it's coming out of it. I've learned a lot about the industry, but I was also able to learn a fair bit during. That said, though, there's a great deal of opportunity and things that were canceled, like whether that be meetings or games or whatever it may be, that sort of took away opportunities for student journalists that we're really excited to see return. Entire beats that went away with cancellations, hockey, whatever it may be, football. And so, yeah, we're just excited to see the return of all of that and the return of opportunity for the Lantern.
Yeah, and hi, everyone. I'm Claire. I'm the editor-in-chief of the Michigan Daily. I would say that probably the biggest challenge is that, pre-pandemic, all of our staff would meet in our newsroom every single night And then overnight, we had to learn how to transition our operation entirely remote, as did every other workplace. But perhaps surprisingly to some, that our paper was very much so a print-based organization, even as professional media spaces were shifting more and more to digital. So overnight, we had to kind of abandon our very, very strong attachment to producing a print paper 5 days a week. And I'm really proud of how my staff has risen up to that challenge, especially as our audience suddenly is scattered all across the world, and not just all across the country. As international students go back home, we've had to realize that our print paper isn't the best way we're reaching audiences. And since March of 2020, we've really built up our social media platforms, our Twitter, our Instagram, especially to reach students. We've made a TikTok. We launched a new website at the beginning of 2021 to kind of usher in us into the more digital, modern era of journalism. And of course, that's brought its own challenges because now we're 24/7 following the news cycle as students. And then also at the same time, as Bella was talking about, as in-person events went away, as in-person sports games went away for a while, a lot of beats disappeared, a lot of opportunities disappeared for our reporters and our editors. But at the same time, it also created a lot of opportunity to write new and different kinds of stories. So I think the best example is that summer of 2020, sports games were not coverable by our reporters, but with the Black Lives Matter movement, we started a sports and society beat, where our reporters, instead of covering games, were covering trends in sports that had broader implications for society. So, and it's been great to see all of that work continue, even as games have come back.
Do you think like your writers, the people who are, underneath you guys, or even you guys yourselves, like they're like, do you think that there's maybe, I guess, going through this is like crystallized what some of you guys want to pursue? You know what I mean? Like in a certain way, like having been thrown into that situation, maybe you found out a little bit more about what you want to do. And Bella or Claire, either of you guys can take this, has maybe kind of like, I guess, narrowed down like what element of journalism that you guys want to go into?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think sort of as Claire mentioned, when we were asked to transition to a digital format, it could have strained relationships across desks. So like, for instance, between arts and sports or arts and news or whatever it may be. But instead I saw reporters and editors step up and reach across coverage areas, and sort of like Claire was talking about with trends in sports, or covering ideas or covering stories that maybe wouldn't have occurred to us before in the everyday routine of, tracking down our beats and the traditional stories in our beats. I think it's created a unique opportunity to collaborate across desks and across areas.
I mean, Albert, to speak to your question personally, the pandemic is what solidified my desire to be a professional journalist. Summer of when we first got sent home, I remember being at home, bought an LSAT prep book, was just starting to, go through it, prepare for the LSAT. And then when Black Lives Matter protests sparked in my very sleepy, very traditionally conservative hometown, that I immediately abandoned that prep book and started covering protests all throughout Southeast Michigan instead. And I think for a lot of my reporters, there's this sense that with the pandemic coming onto our campuses, no regional outlet, no national outlet is going to be able to cover our communities and inform our communities about what students need to know about what's the latest situation on campus with COVID today. And that job has fallen to us. And we've noticed that we have significantly increased in readership. We've significantly increased in engagement with our readers. And I think more than ever, as the situation continues to change on the ground week by week, there's a sense of greater responsibility. And that also, I think, empowers a lot of our staff to want to pursue journalism as a career.
Okay, if any of the other panelists want to pop their video on and talk about their own experiences too, feel free to jump in. Any of you guys want to kind of chime in on what your experience has been like, you know, covering sports or covering news during the pandemic as a student?
Everybody, I'm Jack Emerson, sports editor with the Lantern. So I actually became the assistant sports editor last year during all the cancellations, everything like that. And I think that really also helped me solidify that I wanted to stay on this track, because I think I realized it's probably not going to get much harder than that. You know, covering games in empty stadiums, you know, we had to cover parent protests because they wanted them to play the Big Ten season last year. There were a lot of just outside factors from last season that kind of made it really interesting and a great learning opportunity for me, honestly. And like going into this year, finally getting a full season to cover the team, get to see fans back in the stands, all that kind of stuff. It kind of almost felt like a cherry on top of all the work I put in last year, just because it was so different. It was so bizarre almost.
Go ahead. Saw you just jumped in there.
Yeah, I can jump in. I'm Jared. I cover the Michigan football team for the Michigan Daily, and just sort of speaking to what Jack said, I covered basketball last year, football now. It's so different in the way that things were handled because of the pandemic, and now that we're sort of beginning to get to the other side of it, just in terms of everything was over Zoom last year versus now we actually get to go and talk to Jim Harbaugh and all the players in person. And that just adds a whole other element that makes it so much easier to carry out reporting and get those details from going to the stadiums and watching the crowd and seeing the emotion in a locker room or in a post-game media session that you didn't get over Zoom. So I think these past 2 years have really showed us what's important and also what we missed by having everything over Zoom for the better part of the past year and a half.
Okay, I'll just jump in with my own experience here, and I'm going to give Josh and Jim a chance to give you guys advice too. But you know, the one piece of advice, and I hear you guys talking a lot about the face-to-face interaction with people. I would just say this: like, I don't think we can lose sight of the importance of face-to-face interaction with people and seeing people in person. And it really just smacked me in the face when I did my training camp trip this summer. I think we all got really comfortable doing our jobs through computers, right? And through cell phones and through FaceTime and through Zoom and in forums like this one, right? And we all sort of, I think we all feel like we're really efficient doing that now. And why do I need to go see somebody, right? I, every summer, go to about 20 to 25 training camps. I travel across the country. And the main reason why is I feel like the lifeblood of what I do is who I know, right? And the lifeblood of what I do is talking to people. And I'm nothing if I don't have contacts. If I'm not talking to the people who are in the game, like, I'm worthless. So I need to keep talking to those people, and I need to be face to face with those people, and I need those people to see me. And like, because I'm 17 years into this, like I really kind of like gotten to the point where I can do a lot of it over my phone. And so, you know, you sort of get lulled into that feeling like, okay, like I can do this over Zoom. I can do this over my phone. I went to training camps. I got face to face with the players, with the coaches, with the general managers. It is priceless. It was not the same. It hit me right away. And over and over and over again, I kept saying that to people. So, you know, one piece of advice I could give all you guys, just listening to you, there's nothing that's more valuable than boots in the ground and being face to face with people. It's a relationships business. That's how you wind up doing your job at the highest level. And so my best advice to all of you guys, it's great that we can do all of these things now. I think the face-to-face interaction, and this goes with people, even if some of you guys like that are on this, like, don't wind up going to journalism, I still think it applies. Like, the face-to-face interaction with people, relationships with people are still very, very important. I'll turn it over to Josh and Jim. Any advice that you guys would give any of these people that are on, any of the guys or girls that are on this, that are trying to go into journalism, just from your own experience, any advice you'd want to give them?
Yeah, I think I can echo exactly what you said there, Albert, about being face-to-face, because my job was really unique last year, where I was sitting in a studio and I couldn't even be face-to-face with the people I was doing the shows with because of some of our restrictions. And we were able to get back out this year, and we did the same thing. We went to all 14 Big Ten training camps, and we got face-to-face with coaches and players. And I'm on campuses every week taping interviews with players, and the knowledge is priceless. the familiarity is priceless, and the experiences that you get, because now you get to see the inner workings, are priceless as well. This is general advice, but it definitely applies to media. But you got to be a grinder. And I know that's a little bit of a cliche thing to say nowadays, because everybody's always talking about grinding, but this is an industry where there will be some days where you are up at 4 a.m. and you're not going to sleep until midnight or 1 o'clock. And you have to embrace that, and you have to really love it, because it can get difficult and monotonous. And especially if you're like most people and you start off your career in a smaller market where you're like, I don't even know how many people are actually consuming my work. You have to really enjoy it. Don't let the monotony of the job get in the way. But this is a phenomenal thing that we get to do. And I tell people all the time, being a TV guy, but I get to sit up and watch games, and then I talk ball, and somebody pays me to do it when I would do it for free. You know, we get to do one of the most enjoyable things, and that is to cover sports.
Just to piggyback on what Josh said, we are the luckiest guys on the planet. We get to talk about the game we love, and 2 weeks later, somebody sends us a check. Sorry, but it does not get any better than that. But here's the thing, and I want all of you to, you think you guys had troubles, okay? I did the first game last year between Michigan and Minnesota from Michigan Stadium in the television booth on 3 monitors. There were 8 people, 12 people in a stadium that seats 109,000. And we broadcast the game from these 3 monitors. And while the pandemic was horrific, it taught me a lesson that the game needs fans. Fans and people create an atmosphere that makes the game better for the players, for the fans. It's just better with people. And I've learned that. And again, go back to Josh. He talked about being a grinder. The advice I have, and I've been in this business now 50 years. The thing you need to do is at every opportunity, and during the pandemic, when you had to do the Zoom thing, learn something that you did, or that you gleaned from whatever experience you've had, and take that and put it in your quiver of arrows, because you're going to need it down the road. And I learned last year, my 49th or 48th year in the business, about broadcasting football games in empty stadiums and doing interviews with coaches and players on Zoom. I learned there's a technique, there's a way to get material, good material, without being face-to-face. It's easier now face-to-face to get good material, but it's easier now because I learned from having to use the Zoom to do the same kind of thing. So every opportunity you get, grind it out. You may not get any sleep, but grind it out and learn. And once you learn, put it in that quiver of arrows to use down the road, because you're going to need it. And the more experience you have, the better you're going to be. And the better you're going to be, the farther you're going to progress in your business.
Yeah. And I'll echo both the guys there, Josh and Jim. Great advice, guys. I would say this, like, the one thing Josh said that's correct, like, you have to love it. And I think you hear it in our voice, like the 3 of us, the way we're talking about it, we love to do it. Like, and that's going to mean working on weekends. It's going to mean working at night. Like, it's going to mean, like, when your friends are at happy hour, when you're 24 years old, sometimes you're not going to be able to go. You know what I mean? Like, because for us, at least, like in sports, and I don't know if all you guys are going to get into sports, but if you're in sports, like, the games are when everybody else is off. So no matter what sport you cover, the games are held when other people are off. Like, there's a reason for that, you know? And, then to kind of, piggyback on what both these guys are saying is, whatever you're covering, like, treat it like it's the most important thing in the world. Like, I covered high school sports after I was done at Ohio State, and it felt like a huge step down. And I was like, why am I not in LA covering the Dodgers? Why am I not in Miami covering the Dolphins? But you know what? Like, I got over it. And then I covered high school. I covered high school football like it was the NFL. And you know what? If you want to get into covering politics and you got to go cover like town hall meetings in some middle of the nowhere town, cover that like it's the White House, because you'll learn skills in doing things that way that are going to serve you when you get to the point when you're doing that And if you do it that way, you're going to give yourself opportunity to get there. So
Albert, let me jump in, because I've got a real story that connects to that. So when Big Ten football was on its hiatus last year, I took a job calling high school football games on a local radio station. It was something I had never done. It was a skill I wanted to build, but I grew up in the community that I went to college in, that I currently live in. So it made a lot of sense to do it. And there would be parents at the games who would listen to the broadcast on their phone app or whatever the case was. And I had parents at times that would come up and they would just talk about how much they appreciated the way that we talked about their son and how much it meant to them, because especially when you're covering high school sports, it's the last time a lot of those players are going to do whatever they're doing. And they're going to keep the newspaper clippings, or they're going to remember when you said their name on the radio and talked about what kind of game they had. And it's not that to cover it like it's important to you, because it is at the time, but what you're doing is important to somebody else as well.
Mm-hmm. No
I want to real quickly do a thing. Albert, it goes to what you just said. And I don't want to go all football on you here, but coaches have a way of saying things. They have sayings that get to you, right? And I know Josh has heard this, but it's true. And Albert, what you were just talking about is true. Here's a saying. People wouldn't come up to me and say, God, you're really lucky. You know, you've had a great career and you've done this and all of that. And Schembechler used to tell us, luck is when preparation meets opportunity. And the idea of covering that town hall is you preparing, getting yourself ready. It's your practice session to get to the game, to get that scholarship to the Division I school. That's your preparation. So remember this, everything you do in the small markets, Josh doing the high school games. I did high school games when I first started out, sitting on the roof of a press box. It's raining and my papers are blowing away. But that got me ready to do what I ultimately am doing now. And I love those days. I learned more doing that than I ever did from a classroom or a book. Just remember, learn something all the time, prepare, because when you are prepared, you are more confident and you will be able to do the job better.
Man, you guys are going to make me tear up. I sort of miss those Friday nights now. Like you had to learn how to write on a notebook when it was raining out, and had to train yourself how to do different things but you learn so much doing it. Both these guys are right. I want to open it up to all of you guys, the student journalists on here. And I want to talk to you guys about the Rivalry Edition, because I don't know a ton about it. So whoever wants to jump in, it's a really cool concept, and I love the idea of it. I guess I'd start with, kind of like how you guys have attacked it. And then for those who are in here who maybe haven't seen it, kind of what the end product looks like.
Yeah, I don't know if any of you have the edition in front of you. I just gave mine, or just left mine out in the newsroom, but the Rivalry Edition is a really cool opportunity because, as student journalists, it's a big deal to have the opportunity to create a printed product and then see. I know we talk a lot about how journalism is shifting more digitally, but there's something so special about seeing your byline, seeing for the design team a front page that they designed, all the rest. And so this is that, but on steroids, for lack of a better term, because it's collaboration between, the entire editorial team at Michigan. Thank you. Someone just gave me a copy of it. And ours at the Lantern to produce ultimately what looks like this. Rivalry in the truest sense, front and back. So yeah, it's been really great. Also to just sort of see what other student journalists are up to and combine our unique strengths at both papers.
And Claire, for you guys?
Yeah, and I think kind of going with the fact that student journalists are trying to balance print and digital, we have a print edition, and we also have a website that I can link after I'm finished talking. And our website is also just houses all the content that we have. Sports journalists from both schools write on just the history of the game, all different aspects of the game. Jared wrote a piece about how name, image, and likeness is affecting Michigan football right now. We've had data journalism that kind of breaks down the history of the game with statistics and data graphics. So I think it's really just a great way for our student journalists to channel all of their talent, all of their energy, all of their creativity through something that we all care about, which is the rivalry. And, you know, we have designers, photographers, our audience engagement teams, our website development people, sports journalists, everyone. So many different parts of our newsroom are coming together. So it's not only a collaboration between two schools, but it's the biggest collaboration we have all year within our newsroom. So I think it's just like, not only is it a rivalry, but it is a collaboration. And I think that's my favorite part about doing the Rivalry Edition.
And Jared and Jack, we can bring you guys in too here. Like, is there anything in particular you guys are proud of? Like when people open this up and look at it, like, is there anything that, you know, you look at and you say, yeah, like that's pretty cool. Like 10 years down the line, like I'm going to look back at that and I'm going to be like, that's awesome that we pulled that off.
Oh, for sure. Especially with our design team, working with our design team and seeing like what they do, their process when they're making these auditions, these cover pages that just look fantastic. Just working with them and seeing the stuff that they do, because I have no idea how they pull that stuff off. And it's incredible to see. And I love working with them. But also when we get to open up these opportunities to other reporters who don't normally get the opportunity to cover football, to cover teams, events like this, it's awesome to see some other writers flourish because they get a bigger opportunity like this.
Jared?
Yeah, I'll jump in. For me, I just think seeing like this is something that as a section and as a newspaper, we started talking about over a month ago, and to just see it all come together in the print copy and staggered out on the website is really rewarding. And it was also something that was difficult, like for me and my two other beat mates, because we're pumping out this content in addition to 2 stories a week each for availabilities and then games. So it's not like we just had a blank slate to work on this. So it's rewarding to see all that work and keeping managing that come to fruition. And just as a section, as other panelists have mentioned, you know, we have a data piece, we have design and photography, and everyone just kind of melds together into one big final copy. And I think the right word is rewarding. It's just rewarding to see that all come together.
Was it challenging, like working? Because we didn't do this when I was in school. Like, did the distance make it challenging at all?
I think if there was ever a time where we were equipped to handle the distance, it'd be now.
Yeah.
I think even back previously in the conversation when we were talking about the pandemic's effect on journalism and the learning curve that is learning how to do journalism, all of our resiliency around using Zoom, and yeah, certainly there are communication barriers, but you know, we were all, I think, pretty well equipped going into this.
All right. I want to, before we open it up to audience questions, I do want to kind of open and give you guys some advice and kind of try to help you guys out a little bit more. And I'm going to give my own perspective on this at the end, but Josh, Jim, I think the 3 of us probably all have a pretty good perspective on the way the job market's gone, you know, over the last year and a half. So what would be the best advice that you think you could give somebody on how they'd approach the job market now, based on where it is and the economy of the business and everything else?
Whatever you want to do, get a job in the business, period. I don't care how small, how big, whatever. Work your way through that way. I mean, and that's the way to do it. I'm struck, this is a fundraiser kind of a thing, right? And to me, I'm struck at how constructive it is that this rivalry, the Michigan-Ohio State game, is being used now to generate kind of funds for the future of journalism. And I think both schools should be commended, both papers should be commended in putting this thing together and allowing people to get involved, because this rivalry, everybody's going to brag at the end of the day. Oh, we beat you, you beat us. Everybody's going to wander around and talk about how wonderful it is and all that stuff. But ultimately, what's best about the whole thing is if you're raising money and you're giving opportunities to young students to become journalists to move their careers forward. Ultimately, that's what the universities are all about. It's about educating young people, getting them out there in the job market. And the job market for a journalist, anywhere you can get an opportunity, get one, right, do it. And then save your best stuff and never stop sending out. In my business, it's audition tapes, in the audio, radio, or television, In the print business, it's sending out resumes and showing them what you've done for papers or what you've done for blogs. Get somewhere where you want to go, no matter how big, no matter how small. But again, it goes back to what we talked about before. If you truly love it, that's what you're going to do. But that's the best way. Experience, do it, write it, get it done. Give them your best shot and just keep after it. Grind it, like Joshua said. You got to grind it out, but that's the way to get ahead. And ultimately, if you do that, I think you'll prevail.
Yeah, and I'll echo what Jim said about the Rivalry Edition in the fundraiser, and the fact that these are unique perspectives and it's your work coming to fruition, and the ability to use this as a generator for the lifeblood of the journalism programs, and to be able to do this, I think, is phenomenal. But just in terms of professional advice, I'm with Jim. Like, get a job in the industry and just keep working at it. And you talked about saving your best work, or if you're going to get into radio or TV, having a reel, it's really important, and continually send those things out, have your resumes ready to go. But I also think that students entering the job market today are at a bigger advantage than students have ever been before, because everybody, if you want to get into TV or radio, for example, everybody is talent and everybody's a producer. If you got a laptop or a cell phone, it's got a camera and a mic on it, and you can edit all of your stuff. You can get reps. The hardest part about being in journalism, being in media, is reps are hard to come by. You can get reps because you can do it all on your own. You can start a blog, or you can start a fan website, and you can create the content on your own. And this is valuable because now it gives you an opportunity for somebody to give you constructive feedback on what you're doing, but it allows you to continue to sharpen your sword and build your skill in a way that traditionally you could only really do that if you had one of the traditional platforms of being with a network or being with a publication. You can be that yourself. And I think that's really cool. So take those opportunities and don't just let them pass you by.
Okay. So I do want to emphasize again the importance of the fundraiser, which is one of the reasons we're here. And we're going to give that a little time here at the end after we get to the audience question. My best advice would be along the same lines as what Josh and Jim said, that if you know what you're going to do, you're in a really strong position. If you know what you want to be, whether it's somebody who is talking into a camera, whether it's somebody who is, talking for radio, podcasting, somebody who's a print journalist, find a way to do it. Find a way to get out there, and don't just find a way to write or talk into a camera. If you want to do what I do, find a way to report too. Find a way to go out and build relationships with people. And, the best kind of way I can kind of illustrate that for all of you guys, when I got out of college, I wanted to go work in New York. I thought I need to get into the biggest market. That's how I'm going to be fast tracked X, Y, and Z. So I was going to take any job that I could get in New York. I wound up working at the Asbury Park Press as a night editor, and I hated it. And I did it because I thought it was necessary for me to do it, but I really felt like I was spinning my wheels and I wasn't going anywhere. There was a paper back home that was a fraction of the size that the paper in New York was, that loved me because I had worked there over the summers and everything else. I had relationships with those people. They believed in me. So after like about a year in Jersey, I decided to move back to Massachusetts, and I started doing the job. And once I did the job, I kept doing it over and over again because I really liked it. I wanted to get better at it because I enjoyed the actual work. It didn't feel like work to me. So like the idea that, you can, the idea, like, I think should always be like, whatever I want to do, I want to get as much practice. Josh used the word reps. Keep getting reps. Do it over and over and over again. That's the only way you're going to get better at it, is if you keep doing it over and over and over again. It's like anything else. And so that'd be my first piece of advice. My second piece of advice, and then we'll open it up to audience questions. Learn how to do everything. Cause like, I just know this, like when I was coming out of college in 2002, it was clear the economics of the business didn't work. Hey, guess what? We're still standing. I'm still working in the business 20 years later. Right. Like, so I think like a big piece of this isn't like that one piece of the business or the other piece of the business needs to survive for me to succeed. These jobs are going to exist. All right. Like, and if you want to be just a writer or just a guy who does local TV news, it's going to be harder and harder to do that because these jobs, because the economics don't work, are going to start to consolidate. So they're going to be looking at people who can do more things at once. Right. So if you can write, if you can talk into a camera and you can talk long form on a podcast, like you're going to be more valuable than the person who can do just one of those things. It was hugely helpful for me getting where I got because I've had jobs in television, I've had jobs in print, and now I have jobs in both. So like, I just think my best piece of advice for any of you guys, learn how to do everything well, because that's going to open more and more doors for you. And now I think we can open up to any audience questions we might have. So anything, and I don't know if that's going to pop up in the chat, you guys can help me out there. Do we have audience questions? Take that as a no?
Yep, I dropped one in the chat, and you can also see them at the Q&A feature at the bottom.
Okay, I got it. Yep. Okay. What is the greatest game in the history of the game? And I'll give this to Josh and to Jim, and then I'll give you my answer. The greatest game in the history of the game, is it the 1950 Snowball? Is it the 2001 version? Is it the 68 game, the 69 game, the 02 game, the 97 game, something else? Jim, what's the best game in history?
Well, hey, look, and I'm biased, but I think it was the 69 game that I played in. And the reason why is because the 68 game led to the 69 game. Because what Woody did in the 68 game led to the 69 game, because that was truly the beginning of what you call the 10-year war, and what a lot of people did. And that, I think, reignited the rivalry to the point where it got to a fever pitch. And that game, I mean, it was a watershed game in the history of collegiate football, because Ohio State, I mean, I'm telling you, they were considered one of the best college football teams ever assembled. And for an unranked team to beat them the way we did and create this big 2 little 8, it changed the way the Big Ten Conference played their football. That to me was the greatest game in the rivalry.
Josh?
Yeah, I gotta bring I'll preface by saying I'm 27, so my perspective on the rivalry is a little bit.
You weren't even born then, man.
It was a little bit more narrow than what you two can bring.
Well, but Jim. I'm 41, and I wasn't born for 69 either.
I'm ancient over here. They should be hanging Christmas lights on me.
That is hilarious. I would say it's the 2006 game, number 1 versus number 2. The 42-39 game. That was one of the most exciting games in the rivalry. Ohio State had a big lead at halftime. Michigan was able to mount a comeback. It wasn't enough, but it was one of those that was really fun. And you talk about this game and the importance of it. This is the type of game where players become who they are. Troy Smith in that game, that's Troy Smith who wins the Heisman. You go back into the 90s and you look at Dez and what he did. That's the reason he wins the Heisman. So like, that's one of those games for
Woodson.
Charles Woodson.
Yeah.
Won the Heisman in that punt return. And
absolutely.
The game he had against David Boston.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, that was the cover of Sports Illustrated that week. You guys will remember it was David Boston and Charles Woodson. I think it was Woodson knocking Boston off his route, right?
And Tim Biakabatuka got probably a 3 rounds higher draft pick because of the game he had against Ohio State when he was drafted by Carolina.
Yeah. So my answer might be 02. That was the year I graduated. I got the cover up there, and there's my ticket to the 02 games on that one. That was a really good one. I have this. This is the one you were talking about, Josh, right?
Yep.
So there's my ticket to that game right there. And that's Troy Smith on the cover of Sports Illustrated right after.
And you know, that game was the day after Bo Schembechler passed away.
And it was, yes. Yeah. And I can remember that was the rare game that was at 3:30, Jim. I don't know why it was at 3:30 that year, but I can remember being in the stadium, the sun setting over the stadium. And I can remember the moment of silence for Bo, which is like, to me, is like the ultimate sign of respect in the rivalry was, I mean, like, for as much as those schools say they hate each other, like the reverence for Bo Schembechler in that stadium that day, I mean, it was palpable.
Yeah,
like,
two times in the history of the rivalry, a Michigan person was honored by the Ohio State faithful. The other time was when Tom Harmon played down there and his jersey was literally torn off. I mean, these are historical moments, but the Horseshoe stood up and gave Tom Harmon a standing ovation because of his brilliance that day. And the other moment was that moment of silence for Bo. Big moments in this rivalry.
But I gotta like twist the knife here a little bit, Josh, right? So like, what about this game?
I surprised?
What about this game?
Oh man. Remember watching that one. That was pretty sure that was a year after I left too. That was 2016.
Yeah.
And I remember watching that game, and that was significant for a number of reasons. Is number one, Michigan in the 2010s and really the late, first decade of the 2000s was a nothing program. Then Jim Harbaugh comes in 2015, and he actually had them in a top 10 ranking at the time of that game, his first one. And that was my senior year. We blew the doors off of them. But he comes back in 2016, and that game was literally that close. And now Michigan, even though they haven't had the success, they are that challenger, and they've had some success in the Big Ten East. And now we're looking at them this year. This is going to be one of those games that will probably be historic, because more than likely you're going to get two teams with one loss that are going to be duking it out at the end of the year. And that's what we love about this conference.
That's the way it should be.
That game, I can still remember watching Urban at the end of that game. Like, and I'm sitting in the,
he was lying flat on the ground.
Like, and there's the whole like him like on the ground, right, that they showed on TV. And I was with like one of my college friends at the game, and I'm pointing over, and this is in overtime. And I'm like, look at Urban. And he's like bent over. And I'm like, so while everybody else was like, oh, he collapsed in joy, it's like, I think the guy might be having a heart attack.
Yeah.
Like it was, I had never seen somebody so, I guess, like affected by a game as I saw as Urban at the end of that game. It was unbelievable.
The prevailing thought on that game was if the referees would have marked JT Barrett short and not given the first down, they would have never left Ohio Stadium alive.
The prevailing thought was that Ohio State won.
The prevailing thought in Ohio.
I'll set this one out. I got to be
prevailing
neutral.
thought north of the border.
I represent the Big Ten Conference now. I'll be neutral on that one.
I got a question.
Yeah, you're in a tough spot.
I got a question from Lewis Fulcher here. All right, if there's one play from the rivalry that would epitomize the rivalry, what is it for you guys?
It's hard to say. Again, you go back to the 90s. Desmond Charles Woodson, both their punt returns,
I think so.
Were defining moments. And then the overtime touchdown after the play, the overtime touchdown in 2016 that won the game. I think those were huge plays.
You agree with that?
100%. I mean, those are the ones that stick out in my mind. Again, my perspective is very different, but I can literally see the highlight of Dez striking the pose in the end zone twice. That is literally what this game is about.
Yeah. I mean, it was for me, like, I think like for me growing up in it, and that was the last year. That was my senior year in high school. So this is the last year I was a Michigan fan. I can remember like everybody like sort of like, I remember there was always this question in my head, like, and I grew up like, entrenched in this, and it was like, why haven't those schools won national titles? You know what I mean? Like, and that punt return from Charles Woodson was sort of, it felt like that was where like things turned the corner a little bit, where all of a sudden the schools both became a little bit more nationally relevant again. You know what I mean? Like where it went from, this is a national this is a national rivalry again, which I think like it is always, but like the fact that there was, I think, what was it, a 30-year gap between either school winning a national title was like mind blowing. And, obviously that came to an end in that year in 97 when Michigan got half a title against Nebraska.
Oh, yeah. Three of the four voting properties voted Michigan and one voted Nebraska. So you're going to give Nebraska real quickly. And again, I'm just, historical. Okay. Back in the day when television wasn't televising every game, nowadays, every game is on television. Back in the day, you could only be on television 2 times in 3 years, I think, nationally. Mm-hmm. And every year, Michigan, Ohio State was on, and the game after that was UCLA, USC. That's what created both programs in many ways to be those national programs, because they were the only game on TV that last Saturday of November. it was a beautiful spot for but all four schools, USC, UCLA, Michigan, Ohio State. That was your Saturday afternoon television, and there was no other football games on. And that created, I think, a national reputation for both institutions.
Well, and you think about, real quick on that note, you think about the great players that have played at those four schools, the recruiting advantage to being on national TV in that
You're
situation.
absolutely right.
That does it right there.
Absolutely right.
Okay, last two questions then. This was from Pete Mooney. The greatest player you've seen on either team in this rivalry?
Boy, that's tough. That's tough. I had to block Jim Stillwagon. I thought he was scary good. I think Archie Griffin, you got to put him in the list for Ohio State. But seriously, I mean, you got two Heisman Trophy winners in Woodson and Desmond. And I don't think you can put it down to one guy. I mean, Eddie George was just off the charts good. Troy Smith, the difference between these games in the last 5 to 7 years has been the Ohio State quarterback.
Yeah,
that's the only difference. They've had great runs at quarterback. So I don't think there's one guy. I think at Ohio State side, it'd probably be Archie because he's a 2-time Heisman winner. Mm-hmm. And I think on the Michigan side, it might be Desmond because of Josh mentioning the fact that he did the Heisman pose in the end zone on a punt return against Ohio State.
Yeah, I'd say recently a guy like Ezekiel Elliott in 2015, the game that he had, especially after JT went down, I think it was the literal next play, he broke off a 44-yard run for a touchdown. Super important, obviously, in just the story arc for the Ohio State team in the year where they won a national championship. If they would have lost that game, that's out of sight, out of mind. So I think it's really hard to, like you said, pick just one or two, but you can pick out moments where guys really cemented their greatness by plays they made in the game. No question. And I think the best player ever to play in the rivalry is one neither of you guys mentioned. That's Tom Brady, but it's not because of what he did in the rivalry. I think he was actually 1-1. He was 1-1 against Ohio State. 1 in 99, lost in 98. And it's funny because like my memory is like the game that was more about one player than anybody else. Like, right. Like if there's a game that was about one singular performance, I think it has to be the Biaka Batuka game. Because I mean, Jim can speak to this. That came out of nowhere. I mean, that was like, I think he was like, and he became a great player the year after. Right. But I think if I remember right, like he was just sort of in a running back rotation there. And then all of a sudden he has 300 yards in that game.
He was a great running back. It's just that, running backs are that kind of breed. Once you get a rhythm going and once that offensive line feels comfortable and they start blocking people and you get a running back that starts to get confident, like you are not going to stop me. That's what happened to Tim. It was one of those, look out, here I come. And I will agree with that one game performance from him. And goes back to Josh's point about moments. That moment, that game for Tim Biaka Batuka blew out his entire career. I mean, the rest of his career is kind of a second afterthought compared to that one great performance against Ohio State on the biggest stage.
Yeah, I'll piggyback on Josh too. The Zeke for like a string of games, like the huge play in 14 after the injury, and then just he owned the 15 game. Like that 15 game was really very much about Ezekiel Elliott. Our last questions from Jonathan Greenspan. As a Michigan fan, we have seen down years with some very poor head coaches. Jim Harbaugh has not beaten Ohio State during his relatively short tenure. Yet he's pretty much beaten everyone else. How much of Harbaugh's future is tied to this year's game, and is it fair? Jim, you're on the ground there. We'll start with you.
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously you want to beat your rival, and Jim hasn't done that. I mean, like I said, he's done everything else. He's had this year will be his fourth 10-win season in 7, which isn't bad. If he beats New Maryland, and he'll have 10 wins. So, but is he tied? I don't think losing this game is going to push him out the door. I don't think so. I just don't think so. And so I think he'd like to win it. He addresses it. He's addressed it with the team. It's not like the elephant in the room. Everybody knows that Michigan's got to beat Ohio State, and Jim would like nothing better than to do that. But is his job tied to it? I don't believe so.
Josh, you cover this, and you've been following it, obviously. What do you think?
Yeah, this is a conversation, I think, about expectations as well. And coming into this year, based off of the year that Michigan had last year, I think that there were a lot of people who cover the team and follow the team, a lot of people in the media who expected Michigan to be a 7-8 win team this year. And we're talking about the potential for 10 wins in a New Year's Six bowl game if things work out. So absolutely not. I don't think that his situation is tied to winning this rivalry game. Now, as you look back, of course, there's going to be a little bit of a bitter taste when you consider that Michigan could have won 10 regular season games, but their 2 losses were to Michigan State and they were to Ohio State. Those are games that people who follow the University of Michigan would love to win. But just in terms of the expectations coming in, he has exceeded. And then the fact of the matter is, who are you going to go out there and find that's going to win you more than 10 games next year? You know, you gotta take the good with the bad.
Thanks, Josh, because that's what everybody doesn't forget. It's like, oh, let's throw him out. Now, who are you going to get?
Who are you going to get?
And if you can answer that question and you can get everybody on Michigan on board, okay, fine. You know, that's good. But that's a hard question to ask, and a hard one, maybe harder to answer.
It reminds me a lot of what it was like when I was in school. John Cooper was the coach, and John Cooper did a lot of great things for Ohio State. He nationalized recruiting. He changed the way a lot of people looked at Ohio State, but he couldn't beat Michigan, and it eventually got him, you know, and they said it was academics or whatever, right? Like at the end, I guarantee you, if he were 10-2-1 against Michigan, the academic part of it would have worked itself out. Like, so like it is, but that sort of speaks to the importance of the rivalry too, guys. Jim, Josh, I think you guys would agree with that. Like the coach's futures, a lot of cases, like their success in that game can dictate whether or not they keep their job, even if they are doing a really, really good job otherwise. In a lot of ways, Cooper was what Ohio State needed in the 80s and 90s, the same way I think Harbaugh is what Michigan needed when he was hired in 2015. Thank you, Josh. Thank you, Jim. You guys have been great. I want to turn it over to Bella and Claire now. If you guys just want to tell people where they can pick up the Rivalry Edition, and then just tell them a little bit about the fundraiser, to what they can do to help. Want to give you guys the floor.
Yeah, sure. So here in Ann Arbor, you can pick up the Rivalry Edition at any of our normal print distribution stands. It's on our website. We also have one right in front of our newsroom, which is at 420 Maynard Street, right in downtown. And also, if you donate more than $25, we'll send you a print copy of the Rivalry Edition for free. And to donate, I believe Clara has already sent the links in the chat, but the Lantern and the Daily, we have a fundraising competition going on. First person to 10,000 wins. So we won earlier today, but we did think we were almost going to lose. So good effort to the Lantern on there. But the Rivalry fundraiser continues until kickoff on Saturday at the OSU game. So still open for more than a week.
All right. Bella, Claire, thank you guys very much. Jared and Jack, thank you for contributing. Josh, Jim, you guys were great. Can I get picks from Jim and Josh, or like Josh, can you not do that right now?
I mean, we do picks on the network. You know who I'm rolling with too. So.
and I don't need to. You know who I'm rolling with, right?
Okay. So I guess it's 2-1.
I think Josh and I are pretty much. You can pretty much figure out for yourself who we think are going to win the game.
All right. Well, on a serious note, like I just hope everybody gets a chance to contribute to the fundraiser. The journalism, I think, has become even more important in our country over the last year and a half, and it's really important that we have young people that are going into journalism and that are enthusiastic about going into journalism. And these people that people like Bella, people like Claire, the future of our business. And, I'm certainly in, and anything anybody can do to support that. I'm fully behind. And so be sure to check out those links and give what you can, and be sure to check out the Rivalry Edition. Really appreciate everybody coming out. Had a great time today.
Thanks, everybody.